It's greed, which is really lying behind the story of Prince Andrew, because the reason he and his wife Fergie wanted to make friends with Jeffrey Epstein wasn't because he was such a charming individual, it's because he was rich and he paid off their debts. Mm. And, the royal family has got to clobber Prince Andrew now with lots of money to keep him quiet. Otherwise, he's going to sell a book deal to somebody and tell all their dirty secrets.
Prince Andrew has finally done, well, the honourable thing in some ways and renounced his titles, including the Duke of York, after his friendship with the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein threatened to overshadow the reign of King Charles. Kate Mancy is the Times royal editor. Good morning, Kate.
Good morning.
What is it that has tipped the balance in this way, that this decision has been made now?
Well, I think you gave the answer there in your introduction. It was this email in which we had the first evidence, the first proof that Prince Andrew had been lying over the connection he had with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, we all saw that Newsnight interview in 2019, and many people made their own minds up after that. But here was a piece of paper or an email that showed that actually he'd been in touch with Jeffrey Epstein after he said he'd cut off all contact. Then we had that on the front page of all the newspapers. And then throughout the week, there were various other scandals. And it got to a PR crisis point with the palace, where Andrew had been on the front pages of the newspapers for over 5-6 days. They didn't see him any let up. Virginia Giuffre's full posthumous memoirs are going to be published on Tuesday. Various other Epstein files could threaten to come out. And it became quite clear quite quickly that Charles needed to act. And that's why he then decided to take the public temperature, consult with Prince William and other members of the family. And he made it clear to Andrew that, the titles had to go. He was quite resolute about that. And it could be done the easy way or the hard way. And Andrew did do the honourable thing and decided to voluntarily relinquish those titles, which saved everybody a lot of work, because actually taking away a dukedom, extinguishing it, if you like, would have required an act of Parliament.
So, Kate, just on that, on the kind of technical reality of what's happened, if you like, does it mean that he is no longer the Duke of York, or simply that he will not be using that as a title and we will not refer to him in that way?
Yeah, the latter, really. It's described as extant but inactive. And I suppose the palace is saying the happy outcome of that is that the York sisters, Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, Andrew and Sarah's children, remain unaffected. Their status is enshrined. The king is very fond of his nieces. It was very, very sure that he wanted to protect them. The sins of the father would not be visited on them. And that's one of the reasons why. But also, Charles was mindful of the fact that if it went through Parliament, it'd be taking up valuable parliamentary time. And the idea that this was a move to try to protect his legacy as king, to protect the reign, to protect the whole institution. If it went through Parliament, taking up parliamentary time and money, it wouldn't be a great look.
Yeah. One of our guests on the programme earlier, Kate, was Andrew Loney, author of The Rise and Fall of the House of York. And he suggested, his take was that this isn't really a penalty for Prince Andrew, it just looks good. And I just wanted your analysis of that. Is this a kind of PR move more than a practical sort of penalty for the Prince?
Look, I disagree with that, because Andrew is all about status, as we know. He has clung to that Duke of York title, even in the email that we mentioned, in which he says, we'll play some more again soon to Jeffrey Epstein. He says, we're in it together. He signs off with Andrew, HRH, Duke of York, or, KG for Knight of the Garter. These are titles that mean so much to him. Actually, the fact that he can't use them and no one will ever call him the Duke of York again is a real punishment for Andrew. I think it was noted within the palace yesterday. This was a critical moment in the king's reign. They'd reached a tipping point, was how it was described to me. And I think this is the right move. I think, whether it remains extant, as they say, these titles, actually no one's going to call him that again. That is a punishment for him.
Yeah, fair enough. And just as a final thought then, with the kind of a sort of low-level feeling or implication that there may be more scandal or more detail about scandal to come, whether it's in Virginia Giuffre's book and beyond, does it feel to you, Kate, as though the problem, if I can put it like this, of Prince Andrew has been solved as far as the royal family's concerned?
I think the problem has been solved for now in terms of the reputational risk to the institution. They've made it very clear where they stand. Prince William is supportive, but make no mistake, the King was driving this. The King was the architect of this. He's always going to be a part of the family. As I wrote earlier this week, you cannot extract that Windsor DNA from Prince Andrew, even though you can take away titles. So it's going to continue to be an embarrassment. I don't think anybody thinks the Epstein files are done and dusted. I think there's far more to come. There are other, memoirs from various other victims who've been victims of Jeffrey Epstein, and who knows what information that will bring. On top of that, we've also got the money scandal, his connection to alleged Chinese spies and meetings with people at the top of the Chinese authorities. And I think this is a bit of a line in the sand, that it's now going to go on outside the royal family in a way. But I think, the damage for Andrew, I don't think it's finished at all.
Kate, you've been leading the reporting on this over the last 24 hours and in the past few days as well. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
That is Kate Mancy, the Times royal editor. I should just say, as we do in all of these discussions about Prince Andrew, that he has denied all allegations made against him. And of course, it's worth noting that a civil claim brought in the US was settled out of court with no admission of guilt. Let's remind you then of that interview he gave to BBC Newsnight when he was asked why he had maintained contact with Epstein even after he'd been convicted for sex offences.
And I took the judgment call that because this was serious, and I felt that doing it over the telephone was the chicken's way of doing it. I had to go and see him and talk to him. And I went to see him, and I was doing a number of other things in New York at the time, and we had an opportunity to go for a walk in the park, and that was the conversation, coincidentally, that was photographed, which was when I said to him, look, because of what has happened, I don't think it is appropriate that we should remain in contact. And by mutual agreement during that walk in the park, we decided that we would part company, and I left, I think it was the next day. And to this day, I never had any contact with him from that day forward.
Well, earlier we spoke to royal historian and Prince Andrew biographer Andrew Loney, who told us it's time for the royal family to become more transparent.
This is an attempt to sort of get back on the side of public opinion. But I think, we do need proper accountability and transparency across the whole of the royal family. We need to have royal wills unsealed. We need to probably have a royal register. We need to have them exempted from the not exempted from the Freedom of Information Act. So this is, I think, they've let Andrew be the fall guy for any sort of wider accountability of the royal family, particularly its wealth, but also its ability to basically destroy records and historical records that relate to them.
Well, let's consider the precedent for all of this, I suppose, with historian A.N. Wilson. Good morning to you.
Morning, Callum.
It's lovely to speak to you.
Lovely to speak to you.
This has been a sort of slow-burning demise of Prince Andrew, hasn't it, really, over the last few years? So in some ways it's not surprising. I just wonder, in the history of damage to the royal family, first of all, how this fits in.
Well, I mean, Andrew Loney just now was talking about transparency, and transparency didn't exist until really quite recently for the royal family. I mean, just think about the really major 20th century event in the history of British royalty, when the king was sacked, the abdication of Edward VIII. Up to 3 days before that event, the British newspapers didn't mention the fact that Edward VIII wanted to marry an American divorcee. It just wasn't mentioned at all. It was completely suppressed. And looking back into the past, we know lots of scandals that happened during the reign of Queen Victoria, for instance. She probably had a secret baby by John Brown. Her daughter, Princess Louise, had a baby by a sculptor who was teaching her how to sculpt and teaching her other things as well. Their wicked uncle, Uncle Ernst, probably murdered his valet and certainly slept with at least one of his sisters. But we didn't know any of these things. Nobody knew it. And I think we're now in a position, as Andrew Loney says, of transparency. Everybody knows everything immediately through social media, etc., etc. And so the royal family is in a completely new position. And it's only the younger members of the royal family. We know that all this sacking of Prince Andrew comes not from the king, but from Prince William. And he's the one who, in, I hope, the far distant future, but who knows, he's going to be the king. He's got to be a king in a completely new setting.
Yeah.
So he's got to get rid of all the skeletons from the cupboard.
Does this sort of removal of titles, relinquishing of titles, as we're referring to it, although in practice he is still the Duke of York, he just will not use the title. What's the sort of precedent for that, Andrew?
I'm tempted to say big deal. I mean, it's nothing really, is it? It's gestures, but they had to make some gestures. I think the real scandal of the royal family, again going back to my friend Queen Victoria, is that they started to trouser public money and call it their own money, and so she was able to buy Sandringham and Balmoral and all these other private residences. And it's greed which is really lying behind the story of Prince Andrew, because the reason he and his wife Fergie wanted to make friends with Jeffrey Epstein wasn't because he was such a charming individual, it's because he was rich and he paid off their debts. And the royal family has got to clobber Prince Andrew now with lots of money to keep him quiet. Otherwise, he's going to sell a book deal to somebody and tell all their dirty secrets.
Yes, that's an interesting thought, actually, as to what happens next, what he does next as well.
Well, I mean, if you or I were told we got to go and live in secrecy, we would be perfectly happy, because we have lots of things to do and we have our circle of friends. Prince Andrew doesn't really have any friends, and apart from playing golf, he doesn't have anything to do. He's thick. He doesn't read a book. And so it is a really difficult question. What is this man who might have 20 years of life left in him, what's he going to do? But he can't go on living in a 30-room mansion at, roughly speaking, public expense in the middle of Windsor Great Park. He's got to move to somewhere more modest.
Yeah. What would you say, Andrew, about the jeopardy, the risk that Prince Andrew has sort of exposed the royal family to in all of this, and by way of historic comparative perspective as well? Has this been a precarious time as a result of his actions?
Well, yes, because as I say, in the past, when there were rotten apples in the royal family, the British public, the great world in general, weren't told about it. It was a secret. London gossips might know about it. Sophisticated people might know about it. But most people didn't know. Now everybody knows everything. Yeah. And it's a pretty sordid story by any standards, the Jeffrey Epstein and Fergie and Andrew story. So, I mean, it's done tremendous damage to the royal family, because the royal family, certainly since the time of George V and Queen Mary, and the last queen who was so dutiful and so good, everybody looked up to them as a kind of ideal family. And the thought that all this was going on, and, Virginia Giuffre's death hovers over them like a horrible black cloud. You can't escape it, and they can't escape it. Yeah. And Andrew's brought that upon them.
There was just too much Andrew. That's the kind of bottom line.
And you see, when you think of the good members of the royal family, when you think of Princess Anne, who's almost every week of her life is doing something boring for the sake of the monarchy, and flying around the world with Save the Children, and attending receptions and things like that, and supporting charities. That's what we want from the royal family. We want modest people, as Princess Anne is, doing decent things, because most of us, however scandalous the royal family sometimes has seen in the past, most of us look up to the royal family, and we want them to be there, but we can't have them there if they're going to behave like Fergie and Prince Andrew.
Yeah. I want to ask you as well about what is coming up, actually, next week. The King and the Pope are to pray together in the Sistine Chapel next week. This is the first time a British monarch and Pope have done so publicly since the Reformation. How significant is that?
I should think it's the first time ever, because it's hard to think of any British monarch going to Rome in the past.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, the differences between the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England, which used to be obvious and indeed used to lead to wars and deaths, those differences have been largely ironed out. And if it weren't for the great divisive issue of whether you should have women bishops and women priests, they probably have come together in some form of unity by now. So, I mean, I think it's rather wonderful, whether you're religious or not. I think it's rather wonderful. It's a sign that the horrible religious differences of the past have been put behind us. And the Pope seems a genial, nice, American, sensible person. And the King is basically a genial, nice, decent person. So I think it's rather nice. And also they're going to be praying for the environment and stuff like that.
It's so good to speak to you, Andrew. It's a pleasure to have you on the programme. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for your time. Speak to you soon. That is the historian A.N. Wilson.